Hello, good morning here and greetings again from Guatemala. This is Paul Lennon, and this is the fourth taping, el cuarto episodio de mis memorias, of my memoirs. As you can see, I'm quite bilingual, and there may be even sometimes that I lapse into Spanish without realizing it. And what I did realize um, was that the other day I think I created a word in English by uh, calling myself a very persuasible person. The neologism that I created might be influenced by Spanish. I'm not quite sure whether, uh, but I did remark that I was a persuadable person when I mentioned how I was recruited into the Legion of Mary, which a lot of people don't know about, but which was a kind of a small Catholic organization when I was growing up in Ireland. It's still alive. It was founded by an Irishman, and it was based around the praying of the Rosary, the Legion of Mary. Kind of a coincidence that displays that later on, excuse me, I was to join the Legionaries of Christ. Legionaries. To us was really maybe it was attractive, the name Legion, and of course the Legionaries of Christ, which for Americans or especially maybe conjured up ideas of the French Foreign Legion. As a matter of fact, was probably more similar to the Spanish Foreign Legion, which you may or may not know was very instrumental in getting uh, Generalissimo Francisco Franco back to Spain from his exile in North Africa. And the legionaries, the Spanish legionaries, were the ones who I believe led him back to the mainland and to his conquest uh, of of what he considered the new Spain after the Spanish Civil War, with its 1 million uh, dead. Anyway, getting back to my story, a naive and sentimental Dubliner in the Legion of Christ. I want to recap a little bit because I think I've just been looking at John le Carré's memoir, and he talks about how his his flight. He was actually 17. His flight from England to get away from his father, who was quite a character, to Bern, Switzerland, to continue his studies. And for some reason, he delved into into German literature, excuse me, from the uh, from the town of Bern, Switzerland. But he delved into German literature and culture, and that marked. He tells at the beginning of his story how that marked the rest of his life. And I think it's very clear that by joining the Legion of Christ, the foreign group in our little enclosed Ireland of the 1950s and early 60s was a vertiginous story. As I say in the introduction, basically, of my book, and I'll quote again, a trip to Bundoran in County Donegal changed my life forever. On July the 1st, 1961, I was 17 going on 18. A VW Volkswagen, which we would call van, I believe in Mexico, or they may call it una combi. They call it remember the 10, 12-seater, whatever, VW van. Uh, Ray Cominsky, I think, remarked later on that it was a kind of a blue. I thought it was beige, but he corrected me. It may have been a blue van, and would have been a light blue, which of course was the color of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Anyway, as the van swung into Bundrau's house gravel driveway, my heretofore unremarkable life took a dramatic turn. In that glorious setting of sheer cliffs, very important, wide beaches, salt breezes, and soft hills, I would begin the first lap of my vacation come vocation with the then unknown Mexican order called the Legion of Christ. Americans love to call it the Legionnaires or Legionaries of Christ. Americans, Legionnaires of Christ. We Irish would say Legionaries of Christ. Little did I suspect that as the van crunched to a halt, my life was pulling away. I waxed quite, classy here. The van comes to a halt, and I was taking off on a vertiginous tour full of pleasant and unpleasant surprises. So let us continue. Today, we're taking up, today, the 31st day of March, year of our Lord, 2020. And this is a harrowing year, a harrowing time for all mankind at this moment, because we're facing the coronavirus, COVID-19. We can't get away from it, but we're making a hiatus here because I'm alive and you're alive, and we're the survivors at the moment. Chapter 4 of my story goes called, remember the oars? Yes, relocating to suddenly to sunny Spain. Again, the old alliteration, suddenly to sunny Spain. And that's it. We were taken up. Beginning always with the lovely quotation from Siddhartha. The first light of day entered the room. The Brahmin saw that Siddhartha's knees trembled slightly. But there was no trembling in Siddhartha's face. His eyes looked far away. Then the father realized that Siddhartha could no longer remain at home, that he had already left him. You will go into the forest, he said, and become a samana. If you find bliss in the forest, come back and teach it to me. If you find disillusionment, come back, and we shall again offer sacrifices to the gods together. Now go, kiss your mother, and tell her where you are going. For me, however, it is time to go to the river and perform the first ablution. He dropped his hand from his son's shoulder and went out. Siddhartha swayed as he tried to walk. He controlled himself, bowed to his father, and went to his mother to do what had been told him. End of quote. This is a shorter chapter, and so hopefully we will be short today. Traveling with Father Maciel. And in case you don't know who Father Maciel is, please do your research. And as I continue to reflect on Father Maciel, who died now about 10 years ago, the extent of the devastation that he has caused in the lives who knew him and who were manipulated and abused by him is unknown, unfathomable, as is the whole saga of sexual abuse in this world. People are still, I think most people don't want to hear about this. It's so distressing. It's so stressful. It's so disgusting that we don't want to talk about it, think about it, remember it. We're like Holocaust survivors. Some remember and many don't. Things happened quickly in the Legion of Christ. In the words of the brother of one of my earliest companions, Mike Murphy, who the Irish Do you know? He spoke in his memoir, in one of his memoirs, about how his brother left the home very, very quickly. And this is a true reflection of what happened to me too. At home, Declan had decided to break the family mold. Having completed his leaving certificate at Sing Street Irish Christian Brothers School, he came home to my mother one Friday lunchtime in early July and told her he was heading off the next day. So I would guess in July. It might have been early August, I think, or during the month of August, because we left on the 21st of August. So he's telling this story, which I tell, about leaving 1961, Dublin. We're finishing our leaving certificate, which the kids in Ireland are going through right now. Or later on in the year, but they're concerned about this, the leaving certificate, and how it's disrupted now by the coronavirus. Um, but all this happened to us very quickly. June, as I say, we entered July the 1st, and the 26th of August we were on a plane to Salamanca. This was quick. This is quick stuff. And I might say that this quickness and this suddenness is very often used by manipulative and controlling, coercive, high demand slash, forgive me, cult-like groups. He came home to my mother one Friday lunchtime and told her he was heading off the next day, Saturday, for a week or so. Excuse me, this is his first calling. Excuse me. This is when he goes to Bundoran. An order of priests, the Legionaries of Christ, had visited the school and had invited some volunteers for a few weeks' holidays in their house at Bundoran in County Donegal. So I've been wrong here. We're talking about Declan joining the Legion of Christ before our trip to Salamanca. He was 17 years of age at the time. This is relevant. He didn't see his family, nor they him, for the next 9 years. Now, I may tell the story here that when I was leaving Ireland on that 26th of August, 1961, my mother at the airport asked Father Maciel or Maciel or whatever, when will I see my son again? And again, through the interpreter, probably James Quandro Farias, full name, Santiago Quandro Farias, in the words of Santiago, about 2 years' time, Mrs. Lennon. And here we're talking about one of my companions, 9 years. Because Declan was sent on special missions, being the charming Irishman, he was sent on special missions, and basically it was fundraising. So he did not get back to Ireland to see his parents or his brothers and sisters. We were allowed home for a few days in late August 1961 to get measured for our black suits. The Legion paid for mine at Cleary's on O'Connell Street, Dublin, and prepare for departure to Salamanca. My mother was shocked about the quick turn of events, leaving so quickly for Spain, but she did not want to go against something coming from a clergyman. And maybe she was inwardly thrilled by the prospect of having her one and only son become a priest. The blow was softened to some degree for us and our families. This is so strategic, my goodness, by the news that we were going to Lourdes in northern France, Pyrenees, if you remember, a very special place of Irish religious devotion and pilgrimage. So there were direct flights from Dublin Airport to Lourdes because at that time, and maybe even to this day, this is a place of great devotion of the Irish Catholics to Our Lady of Lourdes. And my father remained non-committal, even though, as I learned many years later, he was going to miss his inseparable companion. I distinctly remember my mother asking Father Maciel at the airport when she would see her son again. In a year or two, Mrs. Lennon, came the reply through the interpreter. And that was what she wanted to hear. But I realize now how well I wrote what I'm writing, what I wrote then. The Legion softened the blow of going so abruptly to Spain and to Salamanca, a city we knew nothing about, and not such an attractive place from our point of view. You know, maybe Madrid might have been, or God knows what, Andalusia, to see those gypsies playing the guitar and singing flamenco or something. But Salamanca was not on our map until we heard about it from the legionaries. Um, but certainly going to, you see how this is a tale, you know, and a tale which is shared by the other seven young men who joined with me on that occasion, and I'm telling the story for them. Nobody else has told the story. Uh, Jacques Kyo has told his story, which is a little later than mine, but he did not make this historic trip to Salamanca. Uh, the later generations would stay in Dublin, would after the Legion had founded in Dublin, and they would go to, I forget the first place where they had their novitiate, which was um, Bellegarde Castle. Our privilege was that we were starting the novitiate immediately. We didn't need to have the Legion approved in Ireland to start our novitiate. We were jumping, you know, uh, jumping a stage here. Self-consciously wearing the new black suit and with the stiff clerical collar chafing my neck, I said goodbye to my parents and sister Patty at Dublin Airport as we headed for Tarbes in France. The first eight were traveling with their leader, three of them from the July batch, Declan Murphy, Brian Farrell, and Paul Lennon, together with five of the old brothers from the earlier recruits, Pierce Allen, Declan French, Francis Coleman, Michael Cahaney, and Olive Morris McGowan. I later realized how Nestor Padre had this penchant for certain names, Mauricio in Spanish, or Maurizio in Italian. I think there had been an attractive, handsome Italian young man who had joined around the same time, and he was Maurizio. Maciel also liked to change unusual names, such as Rigoberto in Spanish, to Cristoforo, Christ bearer. Thus, there are quite a few Cristoforos in the Legion, rebaptized by the founder and superior general. To this day, they are surely very proud of having the name changed from Father Maciel. So these are still stalwart legionaries, undisturbed by the revelations about the horrendous life of Father Marcial Maciel, who changed their life from Rigoberto or whatever it was to Cristoforo. On the plane with Mr. Padre, we communicated through gestures, signs, and broken Spanish. I had never been that close to such a famous and holy person, so we were all kind of awestruck. One of the more outgoing of us took an Erlingus brochure featuring a globe and pushed it at Nuestro Padre as if asking for an autograph. I blinked. He was not a soccer star or a cycling champ, and we had them at that time. And instinctively, I felt uneasy with what seemed to be too much closeness or being in awe. or anything that smacked of adulation, which was what Maciel sought. I didn't realize it. Again, I did not know this at the time, but perhaps I sensed it. I had some kind of a sixth sense. Hope I said that rightly. Nuestro Padre accepted the brochure and drew LC with an arrow pointing at the globe to specify that, to signify that we were going to conquer the world. Then I followed suit and got mine autographed. We felt like a bunch of kids with Santa Claus all to ourselves. Picture from the infamous edition, Paul with his mother. She has this beautiful checkered new coat for the occasion. Wow, what beautiful people. My dad is in his little suit, as you can see, going a little bit gray there. And that's goodbye. What do those poets say, those melancholic poets, of which I'm probably one, that life is made up of so many goodbyes and not so many hellos? But here we are saying hello. Bless our souls. Our maiden voyage, my first airline flight, took place on August 26, 1961, a landmark in the personal histories of the first eight and in the history of the Legion of Christ in Ireland. We're a little bit forgotten because when they focus on the Legion in Ireland, the foundation, of course, they're going to the ones who remained. And those of us who flew away were kind of sandwiched between the original first group and those who stayed in Ireland and then those who went to Salamanca later after their novitiate in Ireland. Excuse me. The pioneer Irish legionaries were landing on the continent. We got this from the British, of course, hey, the continent, uh, beginning the first stage of their search for the Holy Grail, the Salamanca novitiate. When the plane door opened at Tarbes Airport, we were hit by a wave of sweltering heat rising from the tarmac. Deplaning in the company of our fearless leader was as momentous for us as the first man's landing on the moon. If it had not been this bewildered bunch of undemonstrative Irish teens, we might have knelt and kissed the ground. I personally spent the next few days and weeks in a bewitched daze. Overcome, overwhelmed, a mixture of fear and excitement and surprise. Maybe the beginning of the love bombing and other cult-like features. Despite its objective importance, a present-day history of the Legion would underplay this event or exclude it. The leadership cadre would rewrite history in such a way as to exclude some troubling names, such as J.Paul Lennon, once enemy number one of the Legion of Christ. Am I written out of Legion history? The morning following our arrival, after that strange continental breakfast in a little hotel, maybe a convent, a coffee for the first time, and a dry roll, we headed for Lourdes Basilica to dedicate our legionary vocation to Our Lady at the Grotto. In hindsight, we had only a vague idea of what this vocation meant and the demands it might entail. Father Maciel seemed happy surrounded by his first little group of Irish missionaries. In his early letters as founder, wrote about how he had dreamt of this since the late 40s, when he passed through Shannon Airport on his way to and from Europe. Perhaps it was irrelevant to him that we had not yet discerned whether we even had a vocation to the religious life, the priesthood, or the Legion. Like many things in the Legion of Christ, this might have been a foregone conclusion. And wanting to please this holy man without second guessing, we just assumed we had. Enchanting Spain. The little band transitioned from Lourdes, France to Spain in late August through early September 1961 marked another important step. We took a train out of France to Irún in the Basque region just inside the Spanish frontier. Full of expectation in Spain, we would soon be received by a large group of real legionaries. And this is what I would consider the love bombing. Looking out the train window as it drew into the station, everything was exciting and dramatic. Remember, in case you didn't notice, I'm a very emotional person. Dreams were coming true. I had been so bedazzled since Bundoran when I learned one of my fellow Dublin postulants had actually been in Spain. This guy, I think his name was Jim or Tom or something, but I think he had been to Spain, and he was the only realist among this bunch of idealists who was at Bundoran. And he was kind of sitting back and observing and pulling our legs for the most part because we were kind of like so in awe of everything, so innocent and so enthusiastic. Um, and we had still, me, for example, uh, bedazzled by Spain, the land of great soccer players with names like Jesus Santa Maria, Jesus Santa Maria, and names like Real Madrid, bullfighters, gypsies, and flamenco guitar players. Enraptured by the exotic allure of this foreign clime, I asked him, "What are the Spaniards like?" And I've laughed at this recently when I thought of it. My fellow postulant explained how they carried knives, and you had to be careful. Spaniards were very proud and haughty people, and you had to be careful when you were speaking Spanish and not to use the feminine form of the word or the adjective instead of the male form because this Spanish language is so difficult. You got to be careful, and you might use the wrong word in Spanish if you were speaking to them. Uh, if you said to a man, you wanted to start talking to a man, you said, "Usted es, usted es muy guapa." And you're trying to say you're very handsome, but you used a female form, the feminine form. My God, that means he was a female. He might take out his knife and attack you. Imagination. My Spanish friends, I hope you get a great kick out of this. Um, But there you are. And what do they eat? What do the Spanish eat? And he said, well, they have this big leg of ham. I didn't know this was the um, jamón serrano of the Spaniards. It's true. You imagine them going around with a big leg of ham and sitting in the train and this kind of thing. They carve a leg of ham with a flick knife.